Before I tell you this story, I need you to ask yourself something. Have you ever trusted someone completely? Not the kind of trust you hand out easily. Not the sure, I'll let you borrow my car kind of trust. The deep kind. The kind you build slowly, in the dark, in quiet conversations that stretch past midnight. The kind where you say things out loud that you've never said to another living person, because something about this one person makes you feel, for the first time in a long time, completely safe. Now imagine finding out that person was lying to you. Not about small things. About everything. His name. His life. The distance between you. Imagine finding out that the man you fell in love with online, the man whose voice made your heart do things you'd forgotten hearts could do, was sitting in your classroom twice a week, watching you, listening to you, knowing exactly who you were while you knew nothing real about him. What would you do? Would you walk away? Or would you ask yourself, if everything he said was a lie, why did every single word feel more true than anything you'd ever heard before? This is the story of Professor Jane Mercer and the billionaire who hid in her classroom. Stay with me, because I promise you, nothing about what happens next is what you expect. There's a building in Midtown Manhattan that most people walk past without looking up. That's by design. Calloway Tower doesn't announce itself the way newer buildings do. No glittering LED facade. No rooftop garden visible from the street. No architect's ego expressed in dramatic angles. It is simply glass and steel, 47 floors of it, rising with a kind of quiet authority that says, I don't need your attention. I already have everything I need. The Calloway name has been in New York for 4 generations. Great-grandfather Harold Calloway arrived from nothing. A man from rural Pennsylvania with $20, a fierce mind, and a complete absence of sentiment. He bought land when land was cheap and held it when everyone else sold. He built warehouses, then buildings, then an empire so quietly assembled that by the time anyone noticed how large it had grown, it was too late to compete. His son expanded into finance. His grandson Elias took it global, and Elias's son Jefferson was supposed to take it further still. Jefferson Calloway had been raised for one purpose. He had known this since he was 7 years old, sitting in his father's office on the 43rd floor while Elias pointed out the window at the skyline and said, not unkindly, but with the absolute certainty of a man who had never been wrong about anything that mattered, all of this will be yours, and it is your responsibility to be worthy of it. Jeff had spent the next 20 years trying. Private school in Connecticut, undergraduate at Princeton, summa cum laude, economics and philosophy, 2 years at the London School of Economics, then back to New York, into the offices of Calloway Industries, learning the machinery of the empire from the inside. He was good at it. He was, everyone said, extraordinary at it. He understood markets with an instinct that his father's most seasoned advisors respected. He could read a contract and find the leverage point in under 3 minutes. He walked into rooms that had intimidated men twice his age and walked out having restructured the conversation entirely. By 26, he was in every meaningful meeting at Calloway Industries. By 27, he was running 3 of its subsidiary divisions. The financial press called him the quiet force. His father's board called him the future. Jeff called himself exhausted. Not in any way he could have explained to his father. Elias Calloway did not traffic in exhaustion. He trafficked in results, in leverage, in the long game. Feelings were variables to be managed, not conditions to be acknowledged. But Jeff's exhaustion was real and it was specific. He was tired of being known before he spoke. Tired of walking into a room and watching people rearrange their behavior because of his last name. Tired of conversations that were never fully honest because every person he met had something to gain or lose from their relationship with a Calloway. He was tired, most of all, of not knowing who he actually was beneath all of it. His mother had understood this about him. Eleanor Calloway, Eleanor Whitmore before she married, a woman from Boston with her own quiet dignity and a warmth that had somehow survived 2 decades in the Calloway world, had been the one person in his life who spoke to him without agenda. She had died of cancer when Jeff was 19, during his sophomore year at Princeton, and the loss had left a space in him that nothing had filled since. It was Eleanor's trust, money she'd inherited from her own family and kept carefully separate from Calloway assets. That gave Jeff his options. Not a lot of money by Calloway standards. Enough to live modestly. Enough to disappear for a while. On a Thursday morning in late August, he sat in his father's office and told Elias he was taking a leave of absence. Elias looked at him across a desk the size of a small country. "You're what?" "6 months. Maybe a year. I need time outside the company before the board announcement in January." Elias set down his pen. He was 71, silver-haired, and possessed of a stillness that most people found more alarming than agitation would have been. "Explain yourself." "I've been inside Callaway Industries since I was 23. I've never made a decision that wasn't in some way connected to this company. Before you announce me as your successor, I want to know." He paused. Chose the next words carefully. "I want to know that I'm choosing this, not just inheriting it." A long silence. "And if you decide you don't want it?" Elias asked quietly. "Then you'll want to know that before January too," Jeff said. "Not after." Elias studied his son for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen. 6 months, he said. Not a day more. Jeff enrolled at Hargrove University 4 days later. Not as Jefferson Calloway, as Jefferson Cole, his mother's maiden name, the one identity his father had no claim to. He found an apartment on the Upper West Side, modest by most standards, comfortable by any real measure. He walked to the subway. He paid for his own groceries. He sat in coffee shops without anyone knowing his name. For the first 2 weeks, it felt so strange he almost went back. By the 3rd week, it felt like breathing for the first time. Cincinnati, Ohio, is not the kind of city that produces legends. It produces good people, hard-working people, people who understand the value of a dollar and the importance of showing up and the particular satisfaction of earning something through effort rather than luck. Jane Mercer was Cincinnati through and through, even after 15 years in New York, even after the PhD and the tenure and the articles in academic journals that people in her field read carefully. You could hear it in the way she was direct without being cruel, warm without being soft, honest in a way that never felt like a weapon. Her father, David Mercer, had taught high school history for 31 years in the same building. Her mother, Carol, had been a pediatric nurse. They were not wealthy people. They were not even comfortable people, not always. There had been years when things were tight, when the car needed a repair they couldn't quite afford, when Jane and her younger brother Marcus had understood, without being told, that they would need scholarships if college was going to happen. Jane had gotten one, a full ride to Ohio State. She'd studied philosophy because it was the only subject that felt as urgent as it looked, the study of how people decide what matters and why. She'd been the first person in her family to get a graduate degree, the first to get a doctorate, the first to land a tenure-track position at a university that appeared in national rankings. Her parents had driven from Cincinnati to New York for her tenure ceremony. Her father had worn his good suit. Her mother had cried twice. Jane had stood in the faculty hall of Hargrove University afterward, diploma in her hands, and thought, I did this. Every step of this was mine. It was the purest pride she had ever felt. Now, at 34, she was the youngest tenured professor in Hargrove's philosophy department. Her course, Ethics in Business and Society, had a 2-year wait list. Students said it changed the way they thought. Former students sent her emails years later to tell her it had changed the way they worked, the decisions they made, the people they became. She was good at her job. She was, perhaps, among the best in the country at her specific intersection of ethics and applied philosophy. Outside of room 214, however, Jane Mercer's life was quieter. She lived alone in a West Village apartment she'd found 8 years ago when rents were slightly less catastrophic. She had plants she kept alive through discipline rather than instinct. She had a small circle of friends. Her colleague Dr. Rachel Osei, who taught sociology and had a laugh like a thunderstorm. Her college roommate Tina, now in Boston with a husband and twin girls who Jane was the unofficial aunt of. Her neighbor Mr. Patterson, 80 years old, who slipped handwritten notes under her door when he made too much soup. She dated occasionally. She tried several times in the past few years. A colleague, a man she'd met at an academic conference in Chicago, a setup Tina had engineered with her husband's friend that lasted exactly one dinner. None of them had worked. Not for any dramatic reason. Just the quiet, Honest reason that none of them had made her feel the way she needed to feel to make it worth the disruption of her carefully ordered life. She wasn't lonely. She told herself this so consistently that there were weeks she believed it completely. On the first Monday of October, she picked up her notes, her coffee, and the quiet certainty of a woman who had done this many times before, and walked into room 214. She had no idea her life was about to come apart. The graduate seminar in ethics in business and society had 22 students. Jane knew all their names before the first session. She'd read their academic backgrounds, their previous work, their stated areas of interest. It was a habit she developed early in her career and never abandoned. The belief that a student deserved to be known before they walked through the door. She noticed Jefferson Calloway immediately. Third row. Not the back, where the disengaged hid, and not the front, where the performer sat. The third row, which in Jane's experience was always chosen by the most interesting students. The ones who wanted to see everything, but didn't need to announce themselves. He was tall even sitting down. Dark hair, slightly longer than a corporate cut. A jaw that looked like it had been designed by someone with opinions. He wore a plain navy sweater, dark jeans, no visible logos, no jewelry, nothing that performed wealth. But there was something about the quality of his stillness, the ease of a man who had never been uncomfortable in a room, that suggested money the way good posture sometimes suggests good breeding, before a word is exchanged. Jane set her coffee on the desk and opened her folder. Ethics, she said, without preamble, without warming up, is not about being good. It's about deciding what good means when there are no easy answers. Every person in this room will, at some point in your professional lives, be in a room where someone powerful asks you to do something wrong. My job is not to tell you what to do in that moment. My job is to make sure you've thought about it before it arrives. She let that sit. Then, let's begin with the trolley problem. Not because it's interesting. A few students smiled at the understatement, but because it reveals something about how we frame ethical decisions that will be relevant for everything we discuss this semester. Who wants to start? 3 hands went up. She called on a student in the front row. Standard answer, well-reasoned, competent, exactly what the textbook said. She asked a follow-up. 2 more students weighed in. Good discussion. Solid foundation. She looked at the 3rd row. Mr. Cole, your thoughts? He looked up, met her gaze, without the slight flinch most students had when called on unexpectedly. It's the wrong question, he said. Jane tilted her head. Go on. The trolley problem assumes the person at the lever has clean hands, that they arrived at this moment without prior involvement in the system. In real institutional ethics, corporate governance, public policy, any structure with meaningful stakes, the person at the lever usually helped lay the tracks. The question of what do I do now is almost always the wrong question. The right question was asked 20 decisions earlier, and nobody asked it. The room was quiet. Jane looked at him for a moment longer than the situation technically required. Elaborate on what you mean by help lay the tracks, she said. Most ethical failures in institutions don't begin with a dramatic choice. They begin with small accommodations. A report that gets softened. A concern that doesn't get raised in the meeting. A policy that everyone knows is problematic, but nobody wants to be the one to challenge. Those accumulations, each one individually defensible, collectively catastrophic, are what create the trolley moment. By the time someone's standing there making the dramatic choice, the system has already decided for them. Real ethical analysis lives earlier in the chain. Silence. Then, from the front row, someone started typing furiously. Jane said, to the whole room, that's where we'll spend most of this semester, in the earlier part of chain. She looked back at Jefferson Cole. Thank you, Mr. Cole. He nodded once and looked back at his notebook. After class, she stayed at the desk longer than usual. She told herself she was reviewing notes. She was thinking about the 3rd row. 3 weeks before the semester began, Jeff had downloaded an app. Halo was invite only, a private social network built on the premise that anonymity created honesty. No algorithm, no follower counts, no public metrics. You were referred by an existing member. You built a profile, and you connected with people whose writing interested you. Everything was first name only. Photos were optional and could be blurred. What mattered was what you said. Jeff had joined because his former college roommate, Dan, now a tech lawyer in San Francisco, had insisted it was the only place on the internet where people actually talked. He'd found Jane's profile 3 days after joining. She posted an essay, not an academic paper, just a piece of thinking, about cities and solitude, about the paradox of living surrounded by millions of people and feeling, at times, genuinely unseen, about whether that invisibility was the city's failure or something we brought with us, furniture we moved from place to place, and then blamed the new apartment for feeling crowded. Jeff had read it twice. Then he'd looked at her profile. Jane, philosophy, New York, a sparse bio that said only, I teach people how to think about hard things. Still learning myself. He sent a connection request. She accepted 3 days later. Their first conversation was about the essay. He told her he thought she was right that solitude was portable, that he'd taken his with him everywhere and hadn't understood what it was until recently. She asked what had changed. He said, I stopped performing a version of myself for an audience and started wondering if I knew who the actual version was. She replied, that's either very brave or very terrifying. He wrote back, both, usually at the same time. Their second conversation was about a book. Their third lasted until 1 a.m., both of them talking about what it meant to be known by someone, genuinely known, and whether most of us settled for being recognized instead. Being recognized was easier. Being known required showing people the parts you usually hid. He hadn't told her his real name. He was going by S. Merritt, Stephen Merritt, a combination of his middle name and his mother's family name. Close enough to true that it didn't feel like lying. He told himself this every night when he closed the app. Then he enrolled to Hargrove and walked into room 214 and saw her standing at the front with a coffee in one hand and certainty in her eyes. He should have closed the Halo account that afternoon. Instead, that night, he opened it and typed, How was your first day back? And she replied, Interesting. Had a student say something that actually stopped me mid-thought. That doesn't happen often. He stared at his own message on the screen. Took a breath. What did he say? October in Manhattan is its own kind of magic. The city doesn't slow down for autumn the way other places do. It doesn't pause to admire the leaves or let the cooling air change its rhythm. But if you know where to look, in the parks, on the side streets, in the quality of light, on a clear afternoon when the sun drops low and turns everything gold, you can feel it. A city catching its breath before winter. Jane felt it on her walk to campus most mornings. The park. The coffee cart on Amsterdam Avenue, whose owner knew her order. The particular sounds of Hargrove's campus settling into the new semester. In room 214, the seminar had found its rhythm. It was a good group, genuinely engaged, intellectually honest, willing to disagree with each other and, occasionally, with her. She had learned over the years that the quality of a seminar was less about individual brilliance and more about collective willingness to go somewhere uncomfortable together. This group was willing, and Jeff was at the center of it. Not loudly. He didn't speak the most. Several students were more verbally present. Brandon Holt, a second year, who asked questions designed to demonstrate his own intelligence rather than receive anyone else's, spoke at least twice as often as Jeff did. But when Jeff spoke, the room changed. Other students referenced his comments in their own contributions. Arguments that had stalled found new direction when he weighed in. Jane found herself, against her better judgment, structuring discussions to create space for him, leaving openings, presenting problems in ways that made room for the kind of lateral thinking he did best. She told herself it was good pedagogy. The best students elevated everyone. She believed this. Mostly. His first one-on-one consultation was a Thursday afternoon in mid-October. She'd scheduled 30 minutes. It ran 45. Your paper on institutional ethics was strong, she said, sliding it across the desk. His argument about complicity through silence had been the best piece of graduate writing she'd read in 2 years. She'd graded it A-, but you pulled your punch in the conclusion. He looked at the paper. Something in his expression shifted. The slight tension of someone being accurately seen. How so? You establish, clearly and compellingly, that silence in the face of institutional wrongdoing makes one complicit in that wrongdoing. And then in the final paragraph, you introduce hedges, contextual factors, mitigating circumstances. You soften something that, by the internal logic of your own argument, didn't need softening. He was quiet for a moment. Sometimes the full truth has a blast radius, he said. People hedge because saying the complete thing out loud would destroy something they're not ready to lose. She looked at him carefully. There was something in how he said it. Not as a philosophical observation, but as a confession of mechanism. As if he was describing the architecture of a specific decision. Is that a personal observation or a philosophical one? She asked. He met her eyes. A pause, just long enough to be noticed. Does it matter which? In my classroom? Yes, always. Philosophy that can't be lived is decoration. Something moved in his expression. A kind of recognition. Write the hard version, she said. Resubmit by Friday. The resubmission arrived at 11:47 p.m. on Thursday. She read it at 6 the next morning over her first coffee. Still in the quiet of her apartment. The revised conclusion said, in essence, that the desire to hedge, to soften, to qualify, to protect oneself from the blast radius of complete honesty, was itself the central ethical failure it had been attempting to describe. That the person who could see clearly and chose to speak carefully was making the same choice as the person who couldn't see at all. That clarity without courage was indistinguishable from blindness. She wrote exceptional, A+ at the top, and sat looking at it for a long time. She thought about Stephen's messages from the night before. He'd sent a voice note. 30 seconds, city noise in the background. His voice low and deliberate. About loneliness. About how some people carry their isolation like furniture. Moving it from apartment to apartment, and then wondering why the new place feels exactly like the last one. She had listened to it 3 times. His voice, unhurried, slightly deliberate, with that particular rhythm of someone who thought carefully before speaking, had made her feel something she didn't have a clean word for. She recorded a voice note back. Almost deleted it twice. Sent it. She hadn't meant to fall. That was the thing she would think about later. How unintentional it was. How she hadn't gone looking for this. How she had been, by every measure of her orderly, carefully managed life, not looking for anything at all. Stephen had appeared in the way things appear when you're not watching for them. Quietly, incrementally, message by message, voice note by voice note, until one day she realized she was checking Halo before she brushed her teeth in the morning, and the realization should have alarmed her, but instead just felt like the truth. He was unlike anyone she'd talked to in years. He listened, really listened, in a way that was immediately identifiable because it was so rare. He didn't wait for her to finish talking, so he could say his thing. He responded to what she'd actually said. He asked follow-up questions that proved he'd heard the specific words and not just the general shape of her point. He was funny, dry, precise, unexpected. He'd make her laugh at 11 p.m. with a single sentence, and she'd still be smiling about it in the morning. He was honest about himself in ways that were sometimes surprising. The references to a family he described as defined by obligation. A world he'd grown up in that he said looked like freedom from the outside and felt like a contract from the inside. He never explained further. She didn't push, but she filed it. He asked her about Cincinnati, about her parents, about the walk from philosophy to ethics, why applied rather than pure. Because pure philosophy can live comfortably in the abstract, she told him. Ethics has to get its hands dirty. He'd been quiet for a moment. Then, I think that's the most honest description of why anything meaningful is hard. You have to be willing to get your hands dirty. She had thought about that for days. In November, she agreed to a video call. She'd hesitated. There was something about the text and voice format that felt safer, more controlled, more deliberate. A video call introduced something new. A face. The vulnerability of being seen in real time. But Rachel had spent 2 weeks insisting she was ridiculous for not having done it already. Profile photos are lies with good lighting, Rachel said. You need to see this person. The call connected on a Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. He had positioned himself with a lamp to one side. Enough light to see him clearly. The background soft and undefined. City lights through a window behind him. A bookshelf. She saw his face. And something moved through her. A current, a pull. And underneath it, a strange, disorienting sense of familiarity she couldn't locate, like a word on the tip of her tongue, like a song she knew the melody of but couldn't name. She couldn't place it. She set it aside. They talked for 2 hours and 15 minutes. She laughed 3 times in a way she felt in her whole body. He told her about a book he'd been reading and got something slightly wrong, and accepted the correction with such genuine good humor that she found herself charmed by his being wrong almost more than she would have been by his being right. He asked what she was afraid of. She thought about it for a moment, really thought about it, rather than giving the safe answer. "I think I'm afraid," she said finally, "of having built my life so carefully that there's no room in it for anything I didn't plan." He was quiet. "That's not a fear," he said. "That's a diagnosis. And the fact that you can name it means it's already changing." She ended the call and sat in her dark apartment and looked at her hands. She was falling. She knew it the way you know things when you stop arguing with yourself. Cleanly, completely, without room for negotiation. The question was what she was going to do about it. Jane's birthday was November 12th. She didn't make a point of it. Tina sent a gift card. Rachel took her to dinner the Friday before. Mr. Patterson left a card under her door with a $20 bill inside, which he did every year, and which she always put in the jar she kept for the homeless shelter 2 blocks away. On the morning of the 12th, she came downstairs to find her building's front desk attendant holding a package. "Dr. Mercer, this arrived this morning. Courier delivery." It was a long, slim box, wrapped in deep green paper, with a cream ribbon. No return address. She opened it at her kitchen table. Inside, beneath 3 layers of tissue paper, was a first edition of The Ethics of Ambiguity by Simone de Beauvoir. She held it carefully, the way you hold something that is both beautiful and old. The cover was original, a slightly worn hardback from 1948, the year of first American publication. Inside the front cover, the previous owner had written their name in a precise cursive hand. E. Whitmore, 1962. Below the name, a pressed flower, dried and brown but still intact. The note was on cream paper in a clean, unfamiliar handwriting, for the woman who makes difficult things sound inevitable. "Happy birthday, Jane. S." She sat very still. She hadn't told him her birthday. She was almost certain she hadn't. She went back through their conversations in her memory. Had she mentioned it? She genuinely couldn't find it. But the book, a first edition, specifically the title she'd mentioned wanting a proper copy of 3 weeks ago in passing, in the middle of a longer conversation about other things. He'd remembered. He'd found a first edition. He'd had it delivered on the right day. She texted him. The book arrived. "I'm not sure whether to be moved or alarmed." He replied 40 minutes later. "Longer than usual. I'd say both responses are reasonable." She smiled. That afternoon, between her 2 Thursday classes, she found a small paper bag on her desk in room 214. Inside was a new dry erase marker. Her brand. The exact one she always used. The fine-tip blue that she went through at a rate her department's supply budget had repeatedly flagged. And a note on a torn piece of notebook paper, in handwriting she didn't recognize. "Happy birthday, Professor. A friend." She looked around the empty room. She didn't connect it. Why would she? 2 gestures, 2 different people, 2 entirely separate worlds. That evening, she sat on her couch with the de Beauvoir in her lap and thought about the inscription inside the front cover. E. Whitmore, 1962. A woman who had held the same book 60 years ago, had pressed a flower inside it, had read these words about becoming, about the ways we choose ourselves or fail to. She opened to a page marked by the flower, underlined in faded pencil, someone else's hand, decades ago. One is not born a woman. One becomes. She read it twice. She thought about Stephen, about the version of herself that had existed before these conversations began, careful, contained, thorough in her professional life, and carefully managed in her personal one, and about how, in the past 6 weeks, something in that architecture had shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to let light through. She thought about whether she was ready for that. Her phone buzzed. "Stephen, did you like it?" She smiled at the screen. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone has given me in years." She typed. "How did you find a first edition?" A pause. Then, "I know someone who knows someone, and I pay attention when you talk." She looked at that sentence for a long time. "That," she typed back, is rarer than the book. On the 43rd floor of Calloway Tower, Elias Calloway was reading a file. His head of private intelligence, Marcus Webb, officially the director of corporate risk, actually something considerably more useful and considerably less legal to describe, stood in front of the desk with his hands clasped behind him. Marcus had been with Calloway Industries for 19 years. He had the posture of a man who had delivered bad news so many times that he'd stopped distinguishing it from good news. Information was information. Your son has been enrolled at Hargrove University for 7 weeks, Marcus said. Philosophy department. Graduate seminar. Using the name Jefferson Cole, his mother's maiden name. No corporate devices. No Calloway accounts touched since enrollment. He's living off the Whitmore Trust. Elias turned a page, without looking up. Security detail? None. He's taking the subway. A pause. The professor. Elias tapped a photograph in the file. It was a standard faculty photo, professional, composed. A woman who looked directly at the camera, without effort. Jane Mercer. Tenured. 34. PhD from Columbia. Grew up in Ohio. No family money. No significant financial assets. No political affiliations of concern. No meaningful personal relationships on record in the past 24 months. Marcus paused. Professionally, she's well regarded. Published. Her course has a substantial wait list. What does he see in her? Elias asked. It was not entirely a rhetorical question. Marcus, who had learned over 19 years not to answer questions that weren't being asked of him, said nothing. They're communicating outside the classroom. Elias said. It wasn't a question. There are indications of a separate online communication channel. We're working on confirmation. Work faster. Elias closed the file. He was quiet for a moment, the particular stillness of a man who was not being still at all, but was processing at a speed that looked like stillness from the outside. The board announcement is January 15th. Jefferson is to be named my successor in front of 32 directors, 14 institutional investors, and whatever press we allow in the room. I will not have his attention divided. I will not have his judgment or his reputation complicated by. He glanced at the photograph. A complication. What would you like us to do? Elias picked up his pen. He considered the question with the careful precision of a man who had been making exactly this kind of calculation for 50 years. Not should I act, but how, precisely. Do I act in a way that solves the problem permanently, without creating a larger one? Watch, he said. Learn everything. Don't move yet. He set the pen down. And Marcus, she doesn't need to know she's being watched. They never do, Marcus said. Elias didn't respond to that. Below them, 43 floors down, the city went on in its 10,000 directions, indifferent and alive, knowing nothing of the conversation that had just taken place above it. The semester moved toward its end the way good things do. Too quickly, with a fullness that made the pace feel like loss. In room 214, the seminar had reached the kind of depth Jane only experienced once or twice in a career. Students were no longer performing thought. They were doing it, in real time, out loud, in front of each other. Arguments that began as academic exercises had started to feel personal. The room had the particular energy of people who had decided, without quite agreeing to it formally, to actually be honest. Jeff was at the center of it, and not just intellectually. He had a way. She noticed it more as the weeks passed, of drawing other students out, of asking questions that gave someone else room to say the brilliant thing they hadn't quite had the confidence to say. He did it so quietly it took her 3 weeks to identify it as deliberate. On the last Tuesday of November, a discussion about whistleblowing escalated into something none of them had planned. A student had raised a case study, a real one. A tech company whose environmental violations had been internally documented and systematically suppressed for 4 years before a junior analyst went to the press. Brandon Holt argued the analyst had been wrong to go public, that internal channels existed precisely for this reason, that circumventing them undermined institutional trust. Jeff had listened to this for 4 minutes before he spoke. The premise assumes the internal channels weren't already compromised, he said. In the case study, 3 separate internal reports were filed over 14 months. 2 were formally acknowledged and then buried. 1 was never acknowledged at all. At what point does using the internal channel become complicity in the thing you're trying to report? Brandon pushed back. 3 other students jumped in. The room got loud in the best way. Jane stepped back and let it run 20 minutes over time. Nobody left. At the end, she looked at the clock, then at the room, then said simply, "This is what ethics feels like when it's not theoretical. Good work today. All of you." After class, Jeff was the last one out. He paused at the door. "Professor Mercer." She looked up. "This has been..." He stopped. Started again. "I've been in a lot of classrooms. This is the first one in years where I felt like I was actually thinking, not just demonstrating that I could think." She looked at him. There was something in the way he said it. Not flattery, not performance. That made it land differently than a compliment usually did. "The room does that," she said. "Not just me." "The room follows your lead," he said. "That's teaching." He nodded once and left. She sat in the empty room for several minutes afterward. That night, she and Stephen talked for 3 hours. She told him about the class. He listened in the particular way he had, asking the questions that pushed her past the surface of things into the actual substance. "Why does it matter to you so much," he asked, "that they think, not just demonstrate?" She considered it. "Because demonstration without actual thought is the thing I'm trying to prevent. I'm training people who will be in positions of real institutional power. If all I do is give them the vocabulary to sound ethical while continuing to act unethically, I've made things worse. I've given the wrong people better tools." A pause. "That's very honest," he said. "Is it? Most people want to believe their work is purely good, that there's no way it could make things worse. You're willing to say it could. That's unusual." She smiled at the phone in the dark. "You're very good at making me say true things." "You do that yourself," he said. "I just asked the question." A long, comfortable silence. Then he said quietly, "Jane, can I ask you something?" "Always. What would it take for you to let someone in? Actually in. Not just into the conversation, into the life." She was quiet for a long time. "Someone who didn't need me to be smaller than I am," she said finally. "Someone who could keep up. Someone I couldn't fool, even if I tried." "Have you tried? To fool people?" "Not deliberately. But I've noticed that most people let me. They accept the composed version and don't look for what's underneath." "What's underneath?" She laughed softly. "That's a third-day question, Stephen." He laughed too. "Fair enough." But she noticed, afterward, that he hadn't answered her actual question. She had asked what it would take. He had redirected. She filed that too. December arrived cold and clean, the city pulling on its winter coat with the particular Manhattan energy of people who took weather personally. Jane was 3 weeks from the end of the semester. Papers to grade, final sessions to facilitate, the particular administrative weight of a semester closing. She was also, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, stepping out of her building when she stopped. Parked at the curb, directly in front of her building entrance, was a black SUV. Not unusual. This was Manhattan. Black SUVs were practically ambient, but the red ribbon across the hood was unusual, and the man in the gray uniform standing beside it holding an envelope with her name on it was unusual. She stopped. "I'm sorry, what is this?" "Dr. Jane Mercer?" He confirmed her name from the envelope. "Yes, this is for you. Happy birthday, ma'am." He handed her the envelope and stepped back. Inside the envelope was a key fob and a card. The card said, "You said you managed fine without one. You do. But you deserve better than fine. S." She stood on the sidewalk in the December cold and stared at the key. A car. He had sent her a car. Not a card. Not flowers. An SUV with a red ribbon delivered to her door. Her first thought was, "This is too much." Her second thought was, "How does he know where I live?" She hadn't given him her address. She was certain of it. Their conversations had been through the app, through voice notes, through one video call. She had never given him her home address. She stood very still on the sidewalk as people moved around her in the morning rush. Then she took out her phone and typed, "Stephen, how do you know where I live?" She waited. 40 minutes passed before he replied. "I should have asked before I sent it. I'm sorry. That was a mistake." "That's not an answer." She typed back. Another pause. Longer. I know more about you than I've said. I'm sorry for that too. I'll explain everything soon. I promise. She read that 3 times. Soon, he had said. Not now. Soon. She stood in the December cold for another minute, the key fob in her hand, the black SUV gleaming at the curb. Then she went back inside, told the doorman there'd been a delivery mistake, and went upstairs and sat at her kitchen table and thought very carefully about everything she knew and everything she didn't. The gap between the two had just become visible, and it was larger than she'd realized. She didn't confront it directly, not immediately. This was one of Jane's characteristics, the ability to hold a piece of uncomfortable information at arm's length while she gathered the rest of the picture. She had learned it from years of academic work, from the discipline of not drawing conclusions before the evidence was complete. She sat with discomfort rather than resolving it prematurely. But she started paying attention differently. In class, she watched Jeff. She had always noticed him. It would have been impossible not to, given the quality of his contributions, but now she watched with a different lens. The way he sat, the particular rhythm of his speech when he spoke at length, the slight pause before a key point, the way he measured words rather than spending them freely, the way he watched her. She caught it one Thursday, mid-lecture, when she was at the whiteboard. She turned unexpectedly and found him looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. Not the academic attention of a student tracking an argument. Something more personal than that. Something that had edges. He looked away immediately. Smoothly. But not before she'd seen it. She kept teaching. She gave no indication that anything had shifted. That night, she went back through 6 weeks of conversations with Stephen and read them differently. How was your first day back? Before she'd told anyone she was returning from summer. I hope your students didn't stress you too much. Sent on days she'd had particularly difficult sessions. The voice note about the city. Sent the same evening she'd told her friend Rachel, over lunch, that she'd been feeling isolated lately. Small things. Each individually explainable. Collectively, a pattern. She pulled up the one video call they'd had. Watched the recording she'd made. She'd recorded it with his knowledge. A shared agreement to have it. Something people did. She watched the 6-second clip where he turned to answer something. His profile to the camera. The jaw. She had a colleague in the psychology department who talked about the phenomenon of not recognizing faces out of context. How the brain filed faces under situations. This face belongs in this place. And struggled to place them when the context changed. She opened her laptop. Searched Jefferson Calloway. The results loaded. Forbes. The Wall Street Journal. A profile from 2 years ago with the headline, The Heir Apparent, inside the next generation of Callaway Industries. And there, in a photograph taken outside a Manhattan building, the subject looking directly at the camera with the composed neutrality of someone who had been photographed many times and had learned to give cameras nothing useful, was her student. Her Stephen. The same man. She sat at her kitchen table in the December quiet and looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she closed the laptop. She didn't cry. She didn't feel the particular hot rush of immediate betrayal. What she felt was colder than that. More structural. The feeling of a floor you trusted turning out to be a ceiling. The disorientation of a world that has been upside down without your knowledge. She made herself a cup of tea. Drank it slowly. Looked out the window at the city. Then she opened her email and sent Jefferson Cole a message. Please come to my office at 3 p.m. tomorrow. Professor Mercer. He knocked at exactly 3 o'clock. Come in. He entered and stopped just inside the door, reading the room with the precision of someone who understood immediately that this was not a standard meeting. Her posture, the arrangement of the desk, nothing on it except her laptop, closed, and a single sheet of paper she wasn't looking at. He closed the door behind him. Sit down, Mr. Cole, she said. He sat. She turned the laptop around. The Forbes photograph. Jefferson Calloway, the heir apparent, looking at the camera with $3 billion behind his eyes. Silence. He looked at the photograph for 3 seconds. Then he looked at her. She waited. Jane, he started. Professor Mercer. Her voice was even. She had practiced even. I am your professor. You will call me Professor Mercer. He closed his mouth. I want to understand, she said. What exactly has been happening? All of it. Start at the beginning. He was quiet for a moment. She could see him making decisions. Not about what to tell her, she thought, but about how to tell the truth in the right order. I joined Halo before I enrolled here, he said. I was using a partial name, Stephen Merritt. My middle name is Stephen. Merritt is from my mother's side. A pause. I found your profile. I'd watched a lecture of yours online while I was preparing for the semester. When you accepted my connection request, I didn't know we'd end up in the same room. And when you found out? The first day of class. And you said nothing. No. For 14 weeks. Yes. The gifts. Not a question. Yes. The voice notes. The conversations. She stopped herself. The car. That was a mistake. I knew it the moment I did it. I sent it before I thought it through. No, she said. You sent it before you thought I might think it through. She let that sit. How do you know where I live? He looked at her steadily. I had someone find it. I know how that sounds. Someone, she repeated. Someone who works for me. For my family. A beat. I have access to resources I shouldn't have used. Jane looked at him. The composed surface of her was holding. Underneath it, things were moving that she wasn't going to let him see yet. Jefferson Calloway, she said, as in Calloway Industries. Yes, heir to one of the largest private real estate and finance empires in the country. Yes, enrolled in my graduate seminar under a false name. A different name. Not entirely false. Semantics, she said, are not your friend right now. He said nothing. Why, she asked. That's the question I want you to answer. Not the logistics. Not the sequence. Why? He was quiet for a long time. Because, he said finally, for the first time in my life, someone was responding to me. Not to my name. Not to what I represented or what I was worth or what I could do for them. To the actual thing I was saying. And I was... He stopped. I was afraid that the moment you knew, I'd lose that. She looked at him. That fear, she said very carefully, does not make any of this acceptable. I know. You were in my classroom. I graded your work. I made decisions about your academic future. Do you understand what that means? Not just personally, but institutionally? I could lose my position, my tenure, everything I spent 15 years building. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly. Guilt was too simple for what she saw. More like the full weight of a consequence he had known abstractly and was now seeing concretely. I understand, he said. You need to leave, she said, and you need to give me time. He stood, picked up his jacket. At the door he paused. For what it's worth, he said, his voice quieter now, stripped of everything except the fact of what he was saying. I was going to tell you. Before January, I had decided. She looked at him. I don't know if that helps. I know, he said. I'm going to try to earn it anyway. He left. She sat at her desk and looked at her hands for a long time. Outside, the city moved on in its 10,000 directions, indifferent to everything that had just changed inside one office in the philosophy department of Hargrove University. The complaint arrived on a Tuesday. It came through Hargrove's legal department, formal language, neutral tone, the bureaucratic courtesy of institutional communication that has teeth beneath its manners. Professor Jane Mercer was requested to attend a meeting regarding a potential conflict of interest complaint filed by a third party concerning her conduct in the graduate philosophy seminar for the completed fall semester. The third party was listed as Calloway Industries, LLC. She read the email 3 times. Then she forwarded it to Rachel without comment. Rachel called back in 4 minutes. Jane, what is this? His father, Jane said. His father filed a... His father has people who file things. He wouldn't do it himself. She was very calm. The particular calm of a woman who had been angry enough, deeply enough, that it had passed through heat and come out on the other side as precision. The meeting was 2 days later. Hargrove's general counsel, a careful, measured woman named Patricia, who Jane had always respected, sat across from her with a man she didn't recognize. Mid-40s. Expensive suit. The practiced blankness of someone professionally trained to be unreadable. The complaint alleged that Professor Mercer had demonstrated preferential academic treatment toward a student with whom she had maintained an undisclosed personal relationship, creating a breach of university ethics policy, and potentially exposing the institution to liability. Jane answered every question. Yes, she had communicated with the student in question through an online platform, before she was aware of his identity or enrollment status. No, the relationship had not been physical. No, she had not known he was her student when the online communication began. Yes, she had graded his work, and yes, she would place every grade she had given Jefferson Cole in front of any academic review board in the country and defend each mark individually on its academic merits, beginning with the revised conclusion that she still considered one of the strongest pieces of graduate writing she had read in 4 years. The meeting lasted 93 minutes. She walked out, took the elevator to the ground floor, pushed through the heavy front door of the humanities building into the January cold, and called Rachel. "Someone powerful," she said, "is trying to end my career. What are we going to do?" Rachel asked. Jane looked up at the gray January sky. "We're going to wait," she said, "and see what he does about it." She meant Jeff. She was not, as it turned out, going to have to wait long. Jeff found out on a Wednesday morning. Marcus Webb, in one of those moments of calculation that sometimes looked indistinguishable from conscience, forwarded him a file through a secondary channel. No message, just the file. The complaint. Jane's name. Hargrove's letterhead. Jeff read it once. He set his phone face down on the table. He sat with it for 7 minutes. He was someone who had learned to sit with things before acting. One of the few useful habits the Calloway world had given him. Acting from feeling was how people made permanent mistakes. You waited until the feeling and the reason aligned. They aligned at 7 minutes. He called his father. Elias answered on the second ring. "Jefferson, you filed a complaint against her." A pause. His father's pauses were strategic, not hesitation but positioning. "I protected the company from a reputational liability." "She is not a liability." Jeff's voice was very even. "She is a woman whose career you are trying to destroy because she inconvenienced your schedule. She is a complication. At the worst possible time. The board meeting is January 15th. 3 weeks away. And you have spent a full semester." "Careful," Jeff said quietly. Elias recalibrated. "She is not suitable." "She is the most genuinely ethical person I have encountered in my life," Jeff said. "Which I appreciate you won't understand, but I want to say it anyway. Jefferson, listen carefully." His voice was still quiet. This was the thing about Jeff that his father had always underestimated, that the quieter he got, the more certain he was. "You will withdraw that complaint today, before close of business. You will have Hargrove's legal team informed by 4 p.m. that Callaway Industries is retracting the complaint in full, with a note that it was filed in error." "I will do nothing of the..." "If you don't," Jeff said, "I will hold a press conference tomorrow morning and explain to every financial journalist in this city exactly who Jefferson Cole was and why he spent a semester at Hargrove under a different name. I will do this the day before the board is scheduled to discuss my position in the company. And then you can explain to 32 directors and 14 institutional investors why your heir was living under a false identity and what that says about the judgment of the man who raised him." Silence. A long silence. "You wouldn't," Elias said. Jeff said nothing, because silence, in the right moment, says more than any word. "This woman," Elias said slowly, "the way a man speaks when he is deciding whether to negotiate or capitulate, is going to be a problem. She's going to be part of my life." Jeff said, "That's different, and it's not your decision." Another silence. "The complaint will be withdrawn," Elias said, "by 4 o'clock. The line went quiet. Jeff set the phone down and looked out the window at the Upper West Side in January. The bare trees, the gray sky, the street below, with its ordinary procession of ordinary people going about lives that no one was managing for them. He picked the phone back up. He opened Halo. He typed, "I need to tell you something. Can we talk?" He stared at the message for a long time. Then he deleted it. Some things needed to be said in person. The complaint was withdrawn at 3:47 p.m. Jane received the email from Hargrove's legal department. The matter had been resolved, the complaint retracted. No further action would be taken. A brief, bureaucratic note of conclusion that told her nothing about the mechanism of resolution. She knew anyway. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table with the first edition de Beauvoir in her lap and thought about the underlined sentence inside. One is not born a woman. One becomes. She thought about becoming. About who she had decided to be. Year by year. Choice by choice. The scholarships, the degrees, the work, the careful architecture of a professional life built entirely on her own foundation. She was proud of what she had built. She had every right to be. She thought about the walls that architecture had also created. She thought about Jeff, about the 14 weeks of lies and the 14 weeks of truth that had existed simultaneously. Two things occupying the same space in a way that physics said was impossible and human experience knew was not. She thought about what he'd done with his father's complaint. She didn't know exactly what had happened, but she knew something had. The withdrawal was too fast, too complete, too shortly followed by Jeff's message. I need to tell you something. Can we talk? For it to be coincidence. He had stepped in front of something his father had aimed at her. She thought about what that cost a man in his position. What it cost to confront Elias Calloway and win. She thought about whether she was using that as a reason to forgive something she hadn't fully processed. She thought about Rachel, who had said over the phone that morning, "Whatever you decide, just make sure it's what you actually want. Not what makes sense on paper. Not what's safe. What you actually want." Jane had said, "I'll let you know when I figure out the difference." She sat with the book until 10 o'clock. Then she picked up her phone. "I know what you did," she typed. "With your father." He replied in under a minute. "I should have done it sooner. I'm sorry it was necessary at all." She looked at that. "This isn't simple," she typed. "No, I'm still angry." "I know. You should be. There's a great deal we would need to work through." "I know that too. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise." She set the phone down. Picked it up. "Coffee," she typed. "Public place. You talk. I listen. No promises made, none expected." The reply was immediate. "Name the place and time." She chose a coffee shop in the West Village that had been there for 30 years. Worn wooden tables, good espresso, the particular comfort of a place that had survived everything the city had thrown at it through the simple strategy of being exactly what it was. She arrived first, ordered a black coffee, sat by the window, watched the January street, and told herself she was gathering information, being empirical, approaching this the way she approached everything, with rigor and without sentimentality. She was also terrified. She noted that too. It seemed important not to lie to herself, given that honesty was what she was here to demand from someone else. He came through the door at exactly the agreed time. He dressed down deliberately, jeans, a dark jacket, no indication of the world he'd come from. He ordered coffee at the counter without looking at the menu, the way people order in places they've been before. He had been here before. In this neighborhood. Near her. She noted that and set it aside. He sat down across from her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Talk," she said. He did. For an hour, with a steadiness that she suspected cost him more than it appeared to. He talked. He told her about growing up Calloway. The weight of it. The way money at that scale stopped being about comfort and became about control. The feeling, from childhood, of being prepared for a role rather than raised as a person. His mother, the one person in his life who had spoken to him without agenda, who had loved him rather than invested in him, and what her loss at 19 had done to the landscape of his world. He told her about enrolling at Hargrove, the need genuine, urgent, not performative, to be unknown for a while, to exist in a room where no one rearranged themselves because of his last name. "And Halo?" she asked. "I was looking for honest conversation," he said. "That's the entirety of it. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I found your profile. I read what you'd written about the city and solitude. It was the most accurate description of something I'd felt my entire life and never heard anyone say without dressing it up." He looked at her directly. "I sent the request before I thought through what I was doing, which is not an excuse. Just the truth." "When did you realize we were in the same room?" "The first day of class." "And you said nothing?" "No. For 14 weeks." "Yes." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "Why?" He held her gaze. Because from the first conversation, you were responding to me, not to the Calloway name, not to anything I could give you or do for you, to the thing I was actually saying. And I knew that the moment I told you, that would change, maybe permanently. A pause. I was wrong to make that choice for you. I know that. I'm not asking you to excuse it. I'm asking you to understand what it was, not arrogance. Fear. She looked at him for a long moment. Fear is understandable, she said. It doesn't clean the slate. I'm not asking for a clean slate. What are you asking for? A chance to be honest from here. Completely. Without reservation, going forward. And whatever time you need to decide if that's worth anything to you. Silence. Outside, a cab honked. Someone walked past the window with a dog. The city moved in its perpetual motion. I need to say some things, Jane said. And I need you to hear them without defending yourself. Okay. What you did was a breach of trust. Regardless of your intention, regardless of the outcome, regardless of what developed between us, you made a decision to let me form feelings for a person who wasn't fully real. You took something I gave freely and received it under false pretenses. That's a harm. It's real. I won't minimize it, and I don't want you to. I won't, he said. Your father's world is not mine. I didn't grow up in it. I have no interest in performing for it, and I will not be managed by it. If there's anything beyond this conversation, that condition is absolute. I would never ask you to be anything other than exactly what you are, he said. What you are is why I'm sitting here. The age difference doesn't concern me. It concerns me, not as a disqualifier, as a reality that we'd need to navigate honestly. Then we navigated honestly. She looked at him. 8 years ago, she had sat in a different coffee shop in the same neighborhood, 30 minutes after arriving in New York City with her savings and her acceptance letter and her determination, and thought, whatever comes next, I am going to face it clearly, without flinching, even when it's hard. She had been good at that, mostly, except when it came to this, except when it came to the possibility of being fully known by another person, and having to be known back. And accepting that both of those things were terrifying and necessary. I'm not forgiving you today, she said. I'm not asking you to. But I'm not walking away either. Something moved in his face, not relief, exactly, but the particular quality of a breath taken after a long time of not quite breathing. What are you asking for? He said quietly. Time, she said. Honesty. Complete honesty, about everything, always, no more calibrations. No more decisions made on my behalf. And I need to see who you are outside of my classroom and outside of a screen. The actual person. You'll see him, he said. He's not very different from the person you already know. Just more complicated around the edges. I can handle complicated, she said. I have a PhD in it. He almost smiled. Not quite. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They drank their coffee. Outside, January did what January in New York does. Gray and cold, and completely indifferent to what happened inside one coffee shop in the West Village. But inside, between two people who had managed, through deception and honesty and stubbornness and fear, to actually find each other, something settled. Not resolved, not clean, but real. Spring arrived slowly that year, the way things come back after a hard winter, tentatively, with interruptions, with days that felt like regression before the forward movement resumed. Jane did not rush. This was perhaps the most important thing she did in those months, the deliberate, disciplined refusal to be moved faster than she was ready to move. She had spent her professional life arguing that the ethical failure usually lived early in the chain, in the small decisions made before anyone noticed. She applied this to herself. She moved carefully. She paid attention. They met publicly. Coffee. A Sunday afternoon at the Met. Wandering the American wing, where the light came through the high windows in a way that made everything look slightly eternal. A lecture at NYU that she'd been invited to give, which he attended in the audience and said nothing about afterward except, that was the best argument I've heard made out loud in years. She'd said, you're not objective. He'd said, I'm the most objective person in your life. Everyone else wants something from you. She had thought about that for 3 days. She watched whether the Jeff she'd known in room 214, the one with the precise mind and the commitment to truth, held up outside it. whether he was the same in quiet moments as in articulate ones, whether he treated people who couldn't give him anything with the same consideration as people who could. He was consistent. Quietly, stubbornly, without apparent effort. He was the same person in every context she observed him in. In March, he told her about the board meeting. Elias had gone ahead with the announcement. Jefferson Calloway, heir apparent of Calloway Industries, formally named a successor in a January meeting covered by the financial press. Jeff's photograph had appeared on the front page of the Wall Street Journal's business section. His name was searchable now in a way it hadn't been before. Not just in archived profiles, but in current news. People will know who you are, she said. People at Hargrove, the department. They'll have opinions. Many of them unflattering. Probably. He looked at her. Does that change anything for you? She thought about it honestly. It means I need to be certain. Before any of this becomes a public story, I need to be certain it's real and not just compelling. Take the time. I intend to. He never pushed. That was the thing she kept returning to in those months, the complete absence of pressure. He showed up. He was present. He was honest when honesty was difficult, including about himself. He told her about conversations with his father, tense, unresolved, circling towards something neither of them had named yet, with a frankness that didn't ask for her reassurance. He told her about his mother, about the book, the first edition de Beauvoir, that had belonged to Eleanor Whitmore before she married, that Jeff had kept in a box with 3 other books his mother had owned, and that he had sent because it had felt like the truest gift he could give someone. E. Whitmore, 1962. The inscription read, his mother's handwriting. Jane had held the book differently after that. Spring became summer, and Elias Calloway made his second move. It was subtler than the first. He had learned from January that direct assault left evidence. This time, he worked through channels. A word to a trustee of Hargrove's endowment who happened to be an old colleague. A quiet suggestion about the wisdom of a tenured professor maintaining public romantic relationships with former students from prominent families. The particular leverage that came with being the kind of man who had funded buildings and chairs and scholarship programs at institutions that now owed him favors. Jane found out through Patricia how, the general counsel who had managed the first complaint and who had, in the months since, become something closer to an ally. Someone is making noise, Patricia said, over lunch in early June. I can't tell you who, but I want you to know it's happening. What kind of noise? The kind that doesn't file formal complaints. The kind that has dinner with the right people and mentions things. Patricia looked at her steadily. I want you to know because I think you have a right to, and because I think you should tell him. I will, Jane said. She called Jeff that evening. She told him what Patricia had said. She told him clearly, without drama, without asking him for anything. He was quiet for a moment. I'll handle it, he said. I'm not calling you to ask you to handle it, she said. I'm calling you to tell you because we said no more managed information. This involves your father. You should know. You're right, he said, and I will handle it. Not because you need me to, because it's my responsibility. He's my father. What he does in relation to you is my problem to address. It's my life, she said, not a problem to be addressed. Both things can be true. She sat with that. Jeff, she said. Yes, I'm not afraid of your father. A pause. I know. I want you to know that I know what I'm walking into. This isn't naivety. I've looked at the whole picture, and I'm making a clear choice. Jane, let me finish. She took a breath. I've spent a year watching you. Who you are when no one's looking. Who you are when things are hard. Who you are when your father is making your life difficult, and you have every reason to take the easier path. And what I've seen is... She stopped. Looked for the right word. Worth it. You are worth it. The complications included. A long silence. You know, he said quietly, I came to Hargrove to figure out who I was when no one was watching. Did you figure it out? Yes, he said, unexpectedly quickly, and in a classroom on the 3rd floor of the Humanities building. She smiled. Come to the park, she said. There's a bench by the reservoir I want to show you. It was a Thursday evening in late June. The sky over Central Park was doing that thing it did in summer evenings, that particular deep blue, almost impossible, that made the city look like something a painter had imagined rather than engineers and money and human stubbornness had actually built. Jane was already there when Jeff arrived, sitting on the bench by the reservoir, her jacket across her lap, watching the water catch the last of the light. He sat beside her. Neither of them spoke immediately. This had become something they were good at. The shared silence. The ability to be in the same space without filling it. She had come to think of it as a kind of fluency. A language that only worked between people who genuinely trusted each other's quiet. "I've been thinking," she said eventually. "About what?" "About the version of me that existed before October." She looked at the water. She was competent, disciplined. She knew exactly what she was doing and why. She had built something real. A pause. She was also very careful about not wanting too much, about not letting herself need things that might not be there. He listened. "I think," she said, "that I've been living a very edited life, very deliberately edited. And I told myself it was integrity, that I only claimed what I'd earned, only wanted what was possible. But I think some of it was fear." She turned and looked at him directly. "I was afraid of needing something I couldn't control." "Like what?" he asked. "Like this," she said simply. He held her gaze. "I love you," she said. It came out clean and quiet, without performance. The way truth sounds when it's been sitting long enough that it stops being frightening. "I've known it for a while. I didn't say it because I was still deciding whether knowing it was enough to act on it. And now I've decided." He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with something in his face she had been watching for months. That thing beneath the Calloway composure, the actual person, the one who had enrolled in her class looking for something real and found more than he'd been looking for. "Jane Mercer," he said, "I have been in love with you since the third conversation we ever had, which was about solitude in cities and whether loneliness was portable. And I have spent the past 8 months trying to deserve the chance to say that to you honestly." She smiled. "You're getting there," she said. "Just getting there? You have time." He took her hand. She let him. They sat by the reservoir as the sky moved from blue to dark, as the city's lights came on one by one across the skyline, as the park held its summer quiet around them. Complicated? Absolutely. Every inch of it. Worth it. She looked at the man beside her, honest, imperfect, stubbornly present, and felt something she had spent a year arguing herself out of. Peace. The months that followed were not a fairy tale. Jane had never wanted a fairy tale. Fairy tales required suspension of disbelief. She preferred things she could look at directly. There was the ongoing negotiation with Elias, not a resolution, but a gradual and grudging détente, reached through Jeff's steady refusal to be managed and Elias's eventual, practical recognition that the alternative to accepting Jane was losing his son entirely. Elias never became warm. He became, with effort, civil. Jane asked for nothing more than that, and received it, and considered it sufficient. There was Hargrove. The department had opinions, some colleagues supportive, some privately skeptical, one loudly and repeatedly inappropriate, until Rachel Osei delivered a conversation that ended the commentary permanently. Jane kept teaching. Her course remained waitlisted. Her work remained her own. She had never needed the institution's approval to do her job well, and this did not change. There was the public dimension, because Jeff was now publicly Jefferson Calloway, heir apparent, photographed and profiled and speculated about by the financial press. Jane appeared in 2 photographs. She gave no interviews. She made no statements. She was exactly who she had always been, in public as in private, and after 2 months the press found other things to cover. There was the question of his inheritance, the company, the empire, the 47 floors, and the obligations that came with them. Jeff returned to Calloway Industries in the autumn, not as the fully formed successor his father had scripted, but as something more honest. A man who had chosen the role rather than inherited it, who had conditions and values, and a woman in the West Village who would tell him clearly when she thought he was wrong. He was better at the job for all of it. They did not move in together immediately. They were not in a hurry. They had built the thing slowly, and they maintained it slowly, with attention, with honesty, with a recurring choice to show up rather than coast. On a Saturday in November, 1 year almost exactly from the birthday that had started to unravel everything, Jeff came to her apartment for dinner. She had cooked. He had brought wine. It was a completely ordinary evening by the standards of their relationship, which was to say it was warm and quiet, and full of the kind of conversation that reminded her why she had opened a connection request from a stranger on an app late one September night. After dinner, they were on the couch, her with a book, him with a brief he was reviewing, in the particular companionable silence that had become the most reliable marker of everything being right. He set the brief down. "Jane, I want to ask you something." She looked up from the book. He was looking at her with that expression she had come to know as his most serious, not formal, not rehearsed, but genuinely weighted with something he'd been holding for a while. "I want to know," he said, "if you see this lasting." She set the book down. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking what you see," he said. "When you think about the future, I'm asking if I'm in it." She looked at him. This was the question beneath all the other questions. The one that had been present since that first conversation about solitude and cities and loneliness, and what it meant to really be known. The one she had been moving toward, carefully and without rushing, for a year. "Yes," she said, "you're in it." He reached into the pocket of his jacket, which was over the arm of the couch. He produced a small box. Not elaborate, just a box, dark and small, the kind that contained a ring. "I'm not doing this the Calloway way," he said. "No restaurant, no event, no audience. Just you and me in your apartment on a Saturday night, because this is where we actually live." She looked at the box. "I know this isn't simple," he said. "I know there are still things we're navigating, and things we haven't figured out, and things that will be hard in ways we can't fully predict yet. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise." A pause. "I'm asking if you want to figure it out together. Permanently." She looked at him for a long time. Outside the apartment, the city moved in its perpetual ways, the taxis and the foot traffic, and the 10,000 conversations happening simultaneously in 10,000 rooms. In here, it was quiet. "Yes," she said. He opened the box. The ring was simple, a single stone in a clean setting, nothing excessive, nothing that performed wealth. It was exactly right. She held out her hand. He put the ring on her finger and looked at her, and she looked at him, and somewhere in the city a year of complicated, honest, imperfect, entirely real living came to rest in that moment, and everything felt not simple, never simple, but clear. Clear and true, and entirely worth everything it had cost. They were married on a Saturday in April, not in a church that required a waiting list, not in a venue that needed a six-figure deposit. They were married in the West Village, in a small restored building that had been a library in a previous life, its tall windows looking out on a street of old trees that were just beginning to bloom. 43 people. Family, Jane's parents, who had driven from Cincinnati in the same good suit and the same reliable tears, her brother Marcus and his wife, Jeff's cousin Daniel, the only member of the Calloway family aside from Elias, who had made the list, and who gave a toast that made Rachel cry. Rachel herself, who was the maid of honor and had been preparing material for this speech for 11 months, by her own account. Elias Calloway was in attendance. He sat in the third row, not the front, which would have been too much, and not the back, which would have been its own statement. He was civil. He shook David Mercer's hand before the ceremony, and said something that made Jane's father nod. Jane did not ask what it was. She didn't need to know. The ceremony was short and honest. Jeff's vows. "I vow to tell you the truth. Always. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when it's about myself. Even when you didn't ask. I vow to see you clearly, and let myself be seen. And I vow to be in the room, the actual room, not a version of it, for every year we have." Jane's vows. "I vow to stop editing myself for safety. I vow to want things openly, including you, especially you. I vow to fight for this when it's hard, and to ask for help when I'm wrong, and to be honest about both. And I vow to let you know me. All of it, the complicated parts, because that's the only version of love I've ever believed in." When they exchanged rings, Jane's hand was steady. When he kissed her, the room, all 43 people in it, made a sound that was halfway between a sigh and a cheer. Outside, on the April Street, the trees were blooming. A year after the wedding, Jane and Jeff sat on the same bench by the reservoir where they had sat on that June evening when she'd said, "I love you." I've known it for a while. It was a habit they developed without planning it, coming back to the bench. Not regularly, not ritually, just when the city felt like too much, or when something had been hard, or sometimes just because it was a Thursday evening and the light was right. The city had moved on. It always did. Other stories had replaced theirs in whatever spaces stories briefly occupied. Jeff was running 2 divisions of Calloway Industries with a directness and an insistence on internal ethics that had made some people uncomfortable and earned him respect from people whose respect was worth having. Jane had published a paper that had become one of the more cited pieces in applied ethics in 3 years. She was teaching a new course in the fall. They were, by every reasonable measure, exactly who they had decided to be. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She looked at the water. "I'm thinking about the students I'll have in September," she said, wondering which one will be the one who says the thing that stops me mid-thought. "Happens every semester," he said. "Not always," she said. "Sometimes it goes a year or 2 without. And when it happens," she smiled, "it's worth all the years it didn't." He took her hand. She leaned slightly against his shoulder. Not dramatically, just the easy weight of someone resting against someone they trust. The city hummed around them. The water caught the last light. Somewhere across the park, a dog barked twice and was quiet. "Jeff," she said. "Yes, I'm glad you sat in the 3rd row." He was quiet for a moment. "Me too," he said. And that was all. And it was enough. And the city moved on, as it always does, around 2 people who had managed, through deception and honesty and fear and stubbornness and time, to find something that most people spend their whole lives looking for. Something real. And that is the story of the heir who hid in a classroom, and the professor who taught him the one thing his billions couldn't buy. Jeff Calloway walked into Hargrove University looking for himself. He found something better. Jane Mercer had built the most carefully ordered life she could imagine, and then she let it be rearranged. Neither of them did it perfectly. Neither of them was without fault. There were lies and confrontations, and a father who tried to use his money as a weapon, and a woman who refused to flinch. But that's the thing about real love, the kind that actually holds. It doesn't ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be honest. About who you are. About what you want. About the fear underneath the calm surface you show the world. It asks you to show someone the real version, and trust that the real version is enough. If this story moved you, if any part of it felt true, hit that like button. Subscribe to Golden Veil Stories. Ring the bell, because we have more stories where this came from. Stories about love in impossible places. Wealth with a human cost. The truth hiding behind the names we're given and the names we choose. And in the comments, tell me this. Would you have forgiven him? I'll be reading every single one. Until next time, this is Golden Veil Stories. The best part is always what happens next.